everybody, it's Mrs. Haugen. Today we're going to work on lesson 10 in our problem set. So be sure that you have your blue math packet open to lesson 10. There's a couple things I want to show you before we get started. So this lesson's a little bit different because we are constructing or building rectangles. And the way you're going to do that on your iPad or on your device is if you click on this arrow up here that says select mode, you're able to grab these squares and move them around. So when you're being asked to construct a certain kind of rectangle, you can use these squares up here to help you. So let's go ahead and look at number one. Number one says, construct a rectangle with 2 rows of 3 tiles. Well, I know looking up here that rows go sideways. So let me first get these out of the way here a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw my 2 rows, at least 2 lines, just to kind of keep my brain thinking. So I need to have first click the arrow, and then I can drag these. Now, the directions say no gaps, no overlap. So just like when we're measuring something using those little cubes at school, we cannot have gaps, which means they have to just touch barely, but no overlap. So I'm not going to overlap them like this, but I can't have any gaps or any spaces in between. So you have to be really careful when you're building these, and this is just for practice, but you want to be sure that you have them as close as you can without overlapping, but not with big, huge gaps, okay? So there is my 1 row of 3 tiles. So now I'm going to build my second row of 3 tiles. And again, they want all of these slightly touching, no gaps, no overlaps. On the iPad, it's a little bit hard to get them exactly touching, so that's okay if there's a teeny tiny little space in there, that's okay. So what we did here is we constructed a rectangle with 2 rows, row number 1 on the top, row number 1 on the bottom, and each of those rows has 3 tiles. Now, because they wanted us to build them in rows, the rows are my repeated addition. So I'm going to go to my pen tool. So the top row had 3 squares, and the bottom row also had 3 squares. So my repeated addition is simply 3 plus 3 equals 6. So 2 things here. We used our square tiles to construct the rectangle, then we wrote the repeated addition. Now you're not going to have enough tiles to leave this one and build another one, so you're going to have to use some of the same tiles, and that's totally fine. If we look at the second one, this time they want us to have 2 columns of 3 tiles. Well, we know from looking at our diagram up here that columns go up and down. So now we want 2 columns, and again we want 3 in a column. So 1, 2, there's my first column of 3, maybe, and I'm going to keep them together. I'm not going to separate them today. I'm going to keep them together. I have to steal a couple from up here at the top. So we are constructing our rectangle. That looks pretty good. And we're going to write the repeated addition. Now, because we built this rectangle in columns, the columns are my repeated addition. So again, the first column has 3. The second column has 3. So my total again is 6. Now you can see the difference here. Up here we had 2 rows of 3, and on the bottom we have 2 columns of 3. So you can see how even though we have 6 total squares in my rectangle, they look very, very different. one is kind of laying down and the other one is standing up tall. Okay? So let's look at the last one down here. The last one says, construct a rectangle with 5 rows of 2. So again, I want 5 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to put 1 on top. 5. So that just kind of keeps me on track here. So let me get my arrow tool, and now I can move the squares. So this time, each row just has 2. So there's 1 row of 2, 2 rows of 2, 3 rows of 2. I'm doing my best to keep them lined up and not super sloppy. It's a little harder on the iPad than if we had little square tiles in front of us. So right now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of 2. I need 1 more. There's my 5th row of 2. Now, because they wanted me to build this in rows, my number that's repeating is the 2. So I have 5 of them. 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I skip count, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 tiles total. It's a lot of T words. 10 tiles total. So if you take a look at that, you can see that this type of rectangle is one that's standing up tall. Okay. The very bottom on B says, now construct a rectangle with 5 columns of 2. So this time we're building our 2s this way, up and down. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's my 5 columns. So I'm going to drag, I'm out of tiles, so I have to use these again. So I'm going to drag these tiles, and I want 2 in this column, 2 in the next column, 2 in the next column, 2 in the next column, and I have 1 more column line here. Again, I'm trying to build them very carefully. Because I'm on the iPad, I have tiny gaps, but I don't want big, huge ones. No gaps, no overlaps. So there is my final rectangle. It has 5 columns of 2. Now, again, because I built this in columns, my number that's repeating again is 2. So I'm going to actually add a text box, and I'm going to type this one out. I have 2 plus 2, third 2, fourth 2, fifth 2. And I did not change the number of tiles. Actually, I took every tile I used on letter A and I used it for B. So I still have a total of 10 tiles. But you remember this rectangle stood up tall because I had 5 rows of 2. But when I build it as 5 columns of 2, it lays down flat. It looks very different, even though I have the same number of rectangles. Boys and girls, you don't need to do the next page in your problem set. I'd like you to go to your class kick and do your lesson 10 exit ticket.